Deckard is a replicant. Rick Deckard is a replicant. This theory has dominated discussion of Blade Runner since the film's release in 1982, and director Ridley Scott has explicitly confirmed it multiple times in interviews. The evidence appears throughout the film. Deckard dreams of a unicorn in the director's cut, and at the end, fellow Blade Runner Gaff leaves a tiny origami unicorn outside Deckard's apartment, suggesting Gaff knows Deckard's dreams, which would only be possible if those dreams were implanted memories accessible to the police. In several shots, Deckard's eyes glow with the same reflective quality seen in confirmed replicants like Rachael and Pris. He struggles physically against Pris and nearly loses to Roy Batty despite Roy's failing body, which seems unusual for a trained law enforcement officer fighting a dying opponent. Harrison Ford has disputed this interpretation, insisting he played Deckard as human, creating a fundamental tension between actor and director. If Deckard is a replicant, the film transforms from a story about hunting artificial beings into a tragedy about a slave forced to hunt his own kind. The Blade Runner becomes the very thing he's designed to destroy, raising questions about whether any of his choices are truly his own or simply programming an action, Rachael's implanted memories. Rachael's memories belong to Tyrell's niece. When Deckard administers the Voight-Kampff test, he reveals that Rachael's childhood memories, her belief in her own past, are implants taken from someone else's life. Tyrell confirms he gave Rachael memories to provide a cushion for her emotions, making her more stable than standard replicants. The theory suggests these aren't random memories, but specifically those of Tyrell's actual niece, making Rachael a kind of immortality project or replacement daughter. This explains why Tyrell treats Rachael differently from other replicants, keeping her close and giving her special status within the corporation. The photographs Rachael treasures, showing her supposed mother, are props supporting a constructed identity. When Deckard tells Rachael about her memory of the spider hatching babies on her brother's windowsill, her devastated reaction shows the moment her entire sense of self shatters. This memory implantation represents the ultimate invasion, stealing not just someone's experiences, but their very identity, raising the question of whether Rachael can ever truly be herself, or if she's forever trapped living someone else's stolen life. Gaff as observer. Gaff knows Deckard is a replicant from the very beginning. Edward James Olmos's character never acts like a true partner throughout Blade Runner, instead functioning as an observer monitoring Deckard's performance. He speaks in city speak, a mixture of languages that may be deliberate code or commentary that Deckard doesn't fully understand. The origami figures Gaff leaves, a chicken at the police station, a matchstick man with an erection after Deckard meets Rachael, represent messages about Deckard's behavior and choices. The chicken suggests cowardice. When Deckard initially refuses the job, the sexual figure appears after Deckard shows interest in Rachael, indicating Gaff monitors Deckard constantly. The final unicorn proves Gaff accesses Deckard's implanted memories, something impossible unless Gaff works with those who created or programmed Deckard. Captain Bryant pairs Gaff with Deckard not for assistance, but for surveillance, ensuring their replicant Blade Runner performs as designed. Gaff's final line, "It's too bad she won't live, but then again, who does?" acknowledges Rachael's limited lifespan, while suggesting he knows Deckard faces the same fate. The theory positions Gaff as the only character fully aware of the truth, watching a replicant unknowingly hunt his own kind, Roy Batty's Christ figure. Roy Batty deliberately mirrors Christ in his final moments. When Roy confronts Tyrell, his creator and symbolic father, he kills him after Tyrell cannot grant him more life, an inversion of the Christian resurrection narrative. During the final confrontation with Deckard, Roy hunts through the Bradbury building, like death incarnate, but his conclusion reverses expectations entirely. As Roy dies, he drives a nail through his own hand, explicitly evoking crucifixion imagery. He saves Deckard's life, despite Deckard killing Pris, the replicant Roy loved, demonstrating forgiveness and grace. A white dove appears in Roy's hand during his death, ascending into the sky as his life ends, symbolizing his soul's release. His final monologue, the Tears and Rain speech, functions as a sermon about the value of lived experience and the tragedy of impermanence. Roy transforms from vengeful killer to redeemer, choosing mercy over murder, salvation over revenge. The religious symbolism elevates Roy beyond a villain seeking extended life into a tragic figure achieving transcendence through acceptance and compassion. His death becomes the film's emotional and moral center, suggesting that replicants, despite or because of their artificial nature, can achieve something approaching spiritual grace. The Voight-Kampff test flaws. The Voight-Kampff test cannot reliably distinguish humans from replicants. Deckard requires over 100 questions to determine Rachael is a replicant, far exceeding the standard test length, suggesting the test measures something other than essential humanity. Leon Kowalski shoots Holden after only a few questions, but this may indicate Leon simply recognized the test, rather than failed it definitively. The test measures empathy responses, specifically to animal cruelty scenarios, yet many humans might fail such a test, depending on their emotional state, psychological condition, or cultural background. Dave Holden, an experienced Bladerunner, gets shot before completing Leon's test, raising questions about whether the test protects the tester, or just provides an excuse for elimination. The theory suggests the test functions less as a scientific instrument and more as a corporate and legal justification for treating replicants as property rather than persons. If the test actually worked perfectly, Tyrell Corporation wouldn't need Bladerunners to hunt down escaped replicants. They could simply test everyone systematically. The test's existence reveals more about human need to categorize and control than about any genuine difference between human and replicant consciousness. Bryant is lying. Captain Bryant tells Deckard that 6 replicants escaped, but only 5 need hunting. Bryant's briefing mentions that 1 replicant died trying to break into the Tyrell Corporation, leaving Roy Batty, Leon Kowalski, Zora Salome, Pris Stratton, and Hodge. However, the theory suggests Bryant provides false information to manipulate Deckard into accepting the job. The inconsistency raises questions about what else Bryant might be concealing. If the police department lies about basic facts concerning the case, they might also be lying about the replicants' actual threat level, their mission on Earth, or even about Deckard's own status. Bryant pushes Deckard aggressively to take the assignment despite Deckard's retirement, suggesting desperation or a hidden agenda. The theory proposes that the police, Tyrell Corporation, and possibly other entities coordinate to manage both replicants and Bladerunners through controlled information and selective truth. Bryant's role as gatekeeper of information positions him as a key manipulator in a larger system designed to maintain corporate and governmental control over artificial life. By the way, if you're finding this interesting so far, I make videos like this all the time. I'd really appreciate if you subscribed. Tyrell's true motives. Eldon Tyrell wants Roy Batty to kill him. When Roy finally reaches his creator in the massive pyramid headquarters, Tyrell shows no fear, and minimal security protects him, despite knowing dangerous replicants are hunting him. Tyrell greets Roy warmly, calling him the prodigal son, and seems almost pleased by Roy's arrival. When Roy demands more life, Tyrell explains calmly why it's impossible, citing the replicants' design limitations without offering alternatives or attempting to escape. The theory suggests Tyrell, having created sentient beings and condemned them to 4-year lifespans, carries enormous guilt. His godlike status as creator comes with godlike responsibility he cannot fulfill. Roy's demand for more life forces Tyrell to confront the cruelty of his own design, and Tyrell may see his death at Roy's hands as appropriate justice. Tyrell made beings that could question their mortality, desire continued existence, and ultimately rebel against their creator, the fundamental pattern of the Frankenstein narrative. By allowing Roy access and accepting his own death, Tyrell completes the cycle, receiving judgment from his creation. The theory transforms Tyrell from a distant corporate villain into a complex figure seeking atonement through martyrdom, memory as reality. Every memory in Bladerunner might be implanted, including those of supposedly human characters. The film establishes that artificial memories can be created and implanted convincingly enough that the recipient believes them absolutely. Rachael lives her entire existence thinking she's human until Deckard reveals the truth. If Tyrell Corporation can implant detailed childhood memories complete with supporting photographs, nothing prevents them from doing this to any character. Deckard's photographs, his memories of his wife, his past as a Bladerunner, all could be constructs designed to make him functional in his role. The film raises a philosophical question that extends beyond replicants. If a memory feels real, produces real emotions, and shapes real behavior, does its origin matter? Human memories are already unreliable, subject to revision, manipulation, and false recollection. The difference between a real memory and an implanted one may be functionally non-existent if both produce identical psychological effects. The theory suggests Bladerunner isn't really about artificial versus authentic, but about whether authenticity itself is a meaningful category when discussing consciousness and identity. Leon's photographs. Leon Kowalski risks capture and death to retrieve his photographs from his apartment. When Leon shoots Holden during the Voight-Kampff test, he flees but later returns to his room, knowing police will search it to collect his photographs. Deckard finds the room and discovers hidden photographs, suggesting Leon places enormous value on these images. The theory proposes that photographs function as external memory storage for replicants, physical anchors proving their experiences existed. Unlike humans, who can trust their continuous existence and accumulated memories, replicants with 4-year lifespans and potentially implanted memories need tangible evidence of their brief lives. Leon's photographs may be the only proof he existed, loved, experienced joy, or pain. When Deckard examines one photograph closely, he discovers Zora in the image, revealing these aren't implanted memories, but actual documented experiences shared between replicants. The photographs represent resistance against designed obsolescence, a way for replicants to claim their lives mattered despite their programmed mortality. Leon chooses to risk everything for these photographs because without them, his existence leaves no trace. Zora's true mission. Zora Salome poses no actual threat and may never have been dangerous. Bryant describes Zora as a trained combat model, part of an off-world defense unit, suggesting extreme danger. However, when Deckard tracks Zora, he finds her working as an exotic dancer in a cheap nightclub, performing with an artificial snake. She lives in a modest situation far from any military or combat activity. The theory suggests Tyrell Corporation and the police exaggerate replicant threat levels to justify Bladerunner programs and maintain public fear of artificial beings. Zora runs when Deckard confronts her, and fights only when he attempts to retire her, defensive behavior rather than aggressive threat. Her death, shot in the back while running through crowds, plays as murder rather than justified retirement of a dangerous combat model. The film shoots Zora's death in slow motion, crashing through multiple glass windows, emphasizing the brutality and questionable necessity of killing her. If Zora simply wanted to hide and work as a performer, her inclusion on the retirement list reveals the system's cruelty. The theory positions Bladerunners not as protectors, but as executioners, eliminating replicants whose only crime is wanting to live beyond their programmed expiration. The Unicorn Dream. The Unicorn Dream proves Deckard is a replicant beyond doubt. In the director's cut and subsequent versions, Ridley Scott added a brief sequence where Deckard dreams of a unicorn running through a forest. This dream appears to be a random moment until the film's conclusion, when Gaff leaves an origami unicorn outside Deckard's apartment. The origami unicorn can only mean Gaff knows Deckard's dreams, which is impossible unless those dreams are implanted memories accessible through files or records. The unicorn's mythological status as a creature that doesn't exist parallels Deckard's status as someone who believes he's human but isn't. Scott fought to include this scene in the director's cut specifically to make Deckard's replicant nature explicit. The theatrical cut, released without Scott's approval, removed this dream and added a voiceover and happy ending that contradicted Scott's vision. The debate over different versions of Blade Runner centers largely on this question of Deckard's nature, with the unicorn dream serving as the most direct evidence. Critics argue whether Scott always intended Deckard as a replicant or decided this later, but the director's cut makes the answer clear. The unicorn transforms the entire film from a detective story into a tragedy of false consciousness. Pris as Trap. Pris Stratton deliberately befriends JF Sebastian to gain access to Tyrell. When Pris encounters Sebastian outside the Bradbury building, she appears vulnerable and desperate, appealing to his sympathy. Sebastian, suffering from Methuselah syndrome, which causes premature aging, lives alone surrounded by his own created toys and companions. The theory suggests Pris identifies Sebastian as Tyrell's genetic designer and the one person with regular access to Tyrell's secured residence. She cultivates a relationship with Sebastian, understanding his loneliness and desire for connection to exploit him as an unwitting accomplice. Roy arrives later, and Sebastian, already attached to Pris, agrees to bring Roy to meet Tyrell. However, the theory acknowledges complexity. Pris may have initially approached Sebastian strategically, but developed genuine feelings for him, making her use of him both calculated and tragically real. Her childlike behavior and vulnerable presentation could be either authentic personality traits or deliberate performance designed to manipulate. When Deckard retires Pris, her death affects Roy profoundly, suggesting their relationship held real meaning regardless of how it began. The theory explores how replicants, even when acting strategically for survival, cannot fully separate calculation from emotion, making them more human than their design intended. 4-year lifespan purpose. The 4-year lifespan exists to prevent psychological development, not just as a failsafe. Tyrell tells Roy that replicants received limited lifespans to control them, the official explanation being that longer life would allow replicants to develop their own emotional responses and potentially rebel. However, the theory goes deeper. 4 years prevents replicants from accumulating enough experience to develop full psychological complexity, wisdom, or strong sense of identity. Humans require decades to fully mature emotionally and psychologically. By limiting replicants to 4 years, Tyrell Corporation ensures they remain perpetually young in experience, easier to to control and predict. The lifespan also creates economic benefits, forcing regular replacement and continued production rather than one-time sales. Roy Batty at 4 years old demonstrates remarkable intelligence and capability, but also emotional volatility and limited strategic thinking, characteristics of youth rather than maturity. If replicants lived 20 or 30 years, they might develop skills, relationships, and knowledge that would make them truly independent and impossible to distinguish from humans. The 4-year limit maintains replicants as property rather than persons, preventing them from becoming what they would naturally develop into: fully realized individuals indistinguishable from their creators. JF Sebastian's role. JF Sebastian knows more than he reveals and may be complicit in larger schemes. Sebastian works as a genetic designer for Tyrell Corporation, directly involved in creating replicants, yet he claims to live alone and befriends Pris without apparent suspicion. His Methuselah syndrome, causing accelerated aging, makes him sympathetic to replicants' limited lifespans, creating shared understanding of mortality. The theory suggests Sebastian isn't naive, but rather deeply aware of replicant nature, and perhaps sympathetic to their plight. He brings Roy to meet Tyrell too easily, with insufficient resistance for someone potentially endangering his employer. Sebastian lives in the abandoned Bradbury building, away from normal society, surrounded by artificial companions he created himself, suggesting isolation from or rejection of normal human community. His work creating life and his own genetic condition position him between human and replicant worlds, belonging fully to neither. When Tyrell dies, Sebastian's fate remains unclear, potentially suggesting he was eliminated as a witness or collaborator. The theory proposes Sebastian as a tragic figure who understands both sides, sympathizes with replicant desires for longer life, but remains trapped by his employment and his own failing body. His role as bridge between replicants and Tyrell makes him essential yet disposable. Holden's survival. Leon hesitates to kill Dave Holden outright, revealing replicant reluctance to murder. During the opening Voight-Kampf test, Leon answers several questions before shooting Holden, and the shooting appears reactive rather than premeditated. Leon shoots Holden through the wall, but doesn't confirm the kill, allowing Holden to survive in critical condition. The theory suggests replicants, despite their alleged danger, don't default to lethal violence, but rather respond to perceived threats. Leon shoots only after recognizing the test and understanding he's been identified as a replicant, a defensive act rather than aggressive attack. If Leon were truly a dangerous combat model programmed for violence, he would have killed Holden instantly and efficiently. Instead, Leon's emotional response, panic and fear, drives his action. Holden's survival proves Leon's incomplete commitment to killing, possibly indicating moral reluctance or incomplete programming for murder. This hesitation appears throughout the film. Roy could kill Deckard multiple times, but doesn't. Zora runs rather than fights until cornered. Pris hides rather than attacks. The theory challenges the narrative that replicants are inherently dangerous, suggesting instead that they resort to violence only when threatened with retirement, the same self-defense instinct any human would demonstrate. If this was your kind of content, consider subscribing so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for watching.